Hi there, my name is Dr. Katie Saints and this video is about ADHD. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So let's start with what ADHD is. So basically somebody who has this diagnosis struggles with focusing and attending. These are the kiddos where you sit down to do a task with them, but it's really hard for them to attend and focus. They might be really squirrely, wants to run around, jumps from topic to topic. Difficulty following directions. So what you might experience is you tell them, hey, will you go throw this away? They take it from you. They're on their way to throw it away. But on the way there, they get distracted and they get interested in something else and they totally forget about what you told them to do. They weren't being rebellious. It wasn't that they didn't want to listen. They authentically forgot. It was an accident, but it happens a lot and sometimes it can cause frustration in their relationships. Difficulty organizing things is a common symptom of someone with ADHD. And so what that looks like is their rooms are messy, their desk at school is messy, or their lockers. They have a hard time coming up with systems for where things should go and how to remember to where they put something or that they need to bring something with them to school every day, things like that. People with ADHD tend to be pretty forgetful and lose things a lot. Again, it's not an irresponsibility thing, it's an authentic accident. And so that can be pretty frustrating for them. The last one is struggles with impulse control. So emotional regulation is something that's pretty hard for people with ADHD typically. And so you might see them having overreactions or having this strong impulsive response, but then catching themselves afterwards and being like, oh, oops, like that was a little too strong. And so that's something that we can work on and help develop. So there's different types of ADHD. Before the DSM changed, it used to be ADHD and ADD. So ADD took the hyper piece out. So there's actually 3 different ways you can be diagnosed. So you can have the hyper impulsive type where you're just always needing to move, you're always on the go. It's really hard to hold still. Like you just have this like overflow of energy. And then there's the inattentive part where you're actually pretty chill. You're pretty calm. You're not hyper, but like it's hard to focus and it's hard to stay on task, and you start tasks and then you start new tasks and you're kind of all over the place, maybe a little forgetful, but not hyper. And then there's the third type, which is both. You're hyper and you're forgetful and it's hard to focus. And so then you can have that diagnosis. So again, with the new DSM, now all of those types are called ADHD. And then it's just specified which type you have. So next, how do you get diagnosed? So typically what people need to do to get an ADHD diagnosis is go to their regular doctor. You explain your symptoms to the doctor, and if they agree it sounds like ADHD, they're going to refer you to a counselor to do further screening. So this counselor is going to ask you a lot of questions, and typically you're going to need multiple people from multiple environments to verify the symptoms. You can't be diagnosed with ADHD if only one environment experiences the symptoms. So say at home, a kid shows a lot of ADHD symptoms, but at school, they're really good and it's just not an issue there. It's unlikely that kid would get an ADHD diagnosis. We need to see these symptoms in multiple environments. So next, the symptoms can't be due to something else. So take, for example, a child with ODD, that's oppositional defiant disorder. They maybe will show ADHD symptoms, but it's not an accident that they're doing that. Like it's more of an avoidance thing. It's more of a behavior problem, not an authentic, I'm struggling to focus or I'm struggling to remember. Same with ASD. So with autism, a lot of times they stim or they are distracted by their inner world. And that's not ADHD. That's them thinking about a movie, or that's a little bit different. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. But if the symptoms can be explained because of another diagnosis, then they don't meet the criteria for ADHD. And the last one is lack of understanding. So if anyone's given a task that is really overwhelming to them or they're disinterested in, they might not attend that well, and that's normal and okay. And so that can't be the reason for the lack of attending. So the last thing here on this slide is that symptoms must be severe enough to cause damage to social and academic situations. So what that's getting at is, like, all of us are forgetful sometimes. All of us struggle to focus. Going to conferences, sometimes it's really hard to sit through an entire presentation. But if you're still functioning really well in life and it's not causing you problems, you're not falling behind academically, getting in trouble at work, hurting relationships, frustrating people because of these symptoms, then you wouldn't qualify. So these symptoms have to be causing damage to your life in some way. So how common is ADHD and autism? Actually, really common. So if you see this one image here, shows adults with autism who have dual diagnoses. So you can see there's a lot of dual diagnoses that are pretty common, but ADHD specifically is about 30%. So that's a pretty high percentage. If you look at the text I have over here on the left side of the screen, it talks about ADHD with children. And there's actually, like, some controversy around the accuracy of these numbers. So it says here 30 to 80% of kids with autism also meet the criteria for ADHD, but then only 20 to 50% of children with ADHD for autism. So it doesn't quite equal the same. But given the overlap, they're doing more research on biological roots. So both of these diagnoses are neurological disorders. And what that means is it's not like depression or anxiety that we can cure. This means their brains are made differently. And so this is going to be a lifelong thing that you learn how to manage. It's not something that will eventually go away or be outgrown. So can people with ADHD be successful adults? Absolutely. There is a lot of really successful people with ADHD, and the trick is just learning to manage your symptoms. So here on this list, Walt Disney, Michael Phelps, Justin Timberlake, Michael Jordan, Jim Carrey, David Neeleman, Will Smith, John F. Kennedy, Richard Branson, and Albert Einstein all are thought to have had ADHD. So you can see that it's very possible to be successful, wildly successful with ADHD. And in fact, a lot of people with ADHD are really good at sports. And so part of the reason for that is sometimes if they have the hyper part, they need that outlet for their energy. And so then sports can be a really good outlet for that, and they tend to be successful. So what does science say about treatment in ADHD? So when we look at the research on it, the research says that the combination of medication and ABA therapy is the most effective. So when we come up with systems, we come up with strategies to manage the symptoms, and then that combined with medication tends to be the most effective. But not everybody with ADHD needs medication, so that's definitely not a requirement for treatment. So that is something that people should be talking to their doctors about. ABA therapists are not allowed to recommend medication. So when that comes up, that needs to be referred to a medical doctor or a psychiatrist. Regular exercise makes a huge difference. for ADHD symptoms. So when we exercise, we get a lot of chemicals in our body that helps us regulate our emotions. It helps us focus and attend. There's some really cool research that even like if you go on a walk before a big exam, you're way more likely to get a better score on the test. So in this study, they tested college students, and half of the participants did some form of exercise right before a test, and the other half of the students didn't. And the students who did the exercise got a lot better scores on their test. So it really seems to help. Diet makes a big difference. So caffeine, sugar, processed foods, those things, dyes, those things really make it hard to focus, make it hard to regulate our emotions. So there's some cool research that shows like if you do nothing else except for change diet, the symptoms do drastically reduce. The same research patterns occur with the exercise piece as well. So those things can make a really big impact. Another thing to look at is sleep patterns. If they're not getting enough sleep, it's going to be harder to focus and regulate your emotions as well. So those basic routines are going to be really helpful. So when it comes to the routine piece of ADHD, routines are really valuable and important. If something is a daily routine that's predictable, typically people with ADHD do really well with it. And so when we're looking at adults with ADHD, they really thrive on jobs that are predictable and hands-on. So, you know, if you have a job that's 8 to 5 every day, they're unlikely to be late for work because it's so predictable. They can come up with a system and a routine to make sure they're on time. But if the time of their work is always changing, that's going to be a little bit harder to adapt, and they might struggle with being late or different things like that. So whenever you can make a routine, that's going to really help. So morning routine, bedtime routine, homework, chore routine, you know, especially on those non-preferred things. If it's a predictable routine, that's really going to help. So next, how would therapy change if my client had ADHD and autism? So ABA therapy is really effective for both, and it doesn't look that different. Well, there's some small changes you would make though. So one of them is more immediate contingencies. So somebody who has ADHD is not typically going to want to wait for rewards. So if you said in a month you can earn this, it's going to be out of sight, out of mind. So it needs to be quicker than that. The contingencies need to be shorter. Like first, then works really good. Like do this activity, and then after the activity is over, then you can do X, Y, Z. So shorter contingencies really help. Increased focus on executive functioning skills. So executive functioning skills, we're going to go into a little bit more on the next slide. But those are really the core symptoms of ADHD that are a struggle. And so when we focus on them and practice them, then that really helps manage those symptoms. And lastly is clear expectations. You know, people who have an ADHD diagnosis are not disobeying or are not attending due to problem behavior. It's frustrating for them too. And so you can help set them up for success by making expectations really clear and reminding them right before the event. Hey, here's how you can be successful. Don't forget when you go to this event, this is what I need you to do. You know, making things super clear so they know what the expectations are, and there's no confusion about how to succeed in that environment. So let's look at executive functioning skills. So executive functioning skills includes organization, the ability to regulate your emotions, short-term and memory recall, expressing alertness and effort, and being able to push through those mentally draining tasks. shifting your attention to different things and being able to come back, all of that kind of stuff. So executive functioning skills are really important for all of us to be successful adults. And if you search on Amazon or Google, you can find there's lots of workbooks and there's lots of different resources out there that specifically target executive functioning skills. So let's look at how we work on them. So this visual here has a few ideas for how we can practice executive functioning skills with kids. So have homework written down in the same spot every day. So having a homework spot is going to help them not lose things. It's going to help make it a routine. It's going to be more predictable. So that's going to help. So you can brainstorm with your child like, hey, what sort of things can we create a space for? So you always know where it is and that we always put it back in that spot. Next one is schedule a weekly organization time. So what can happen, I'm sure you've all experienced this, where you clean something, it looks amazing, but then time passes and it starts to get messier, and it just builds up, and then it's like overwhelming, and like you lost all the organization you originally had. So if you create a routine of every Sunday is reorganized stuff, that's going to really help stay on top of that so you don't lose the progress you made when you originally created your organizational system. Next, create an end of the day checklist to remember materials. So maybe before bed, there could be a list of things like, okay, what do I need to do to prepare for tomorrow? What do I need to do to make sure I don't forget anything important? And so this list you could make with someone and you could put it on their wall, or there's so many like cool apps now that you could put on your phone. Like there's different ways you can do this that will help hold you accountable and help you remember these are the important things I'm going to need to bring to work or bring to school. Next one, keep extra books at home and in the classroom. So part of what happens with kids with ADHD a lot is that they will forget things at school or at home, and then they won't be able to do their homework assignments because they don't have all the materials they need. So if you eliminate the opportunity for them to forget something, then you can completely avoid that. Like in some cases, you can just have 2 copies of something and one stays at mom's house, the other stays at dad's house. Then you don't have to worry about bringing it back and forth. So brainstorm with your kiddo about if there's anything like that. Next, explicitly teach executive functioning and studying skills. So like I mentioned earlier, there's all those workbooks and like these activities that I'm describing here are targeting executive functioning skills. So our brain is cool in that like what we practice, what we spend time doing, we get better and better at. So if we know people with ADHD struggle with executive functioning skills, if we specifically target working on those on a regular basis, we're going to get better at it. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. Next, create a routine and practice each of them. So this is where you have to brainstorm about what things can be a routine. Chores, homework, morning routine, bedtime routine, those kind of things are really common routines. So whatever you can think of, like brainstorm with your kiddo and try and figure out like where can we create routines that are predictable to help you succeed. Next, provide brain breaks before and after activities, especially activities that require focus. So it's human nature that you just get restless after a while and have a hard time focusing. So people with ADHD tend to get pretty drained by like mental tasks that require a lot of focus. And so if you provide movement breaks before and after, that could really help. So an example of something I do, even though I don't have an ADHD diagnosis, is I actually just have this like weights right here on my desk. And so in between sessions or in between meetings, sometimes I'll just like work out with this, and that physical exercise helps me to focus in my next meeting. It helps me to tune in better. So we as humans need these movement breaks. And so people with ADHD especially need them. So next one, use countdowns and time check-ins, things like that. So this helps make expectations clear, and it kind of helps mentally prepare them. Like, okay, you are going to have to focus for 15 minutes, and then you can run around. But for these 15 minutes, I need you to be here in this moment. So it just helps set them up for success. It helps mentally prepare them. It helps make expectations clear. So next, give an extra 3 to 5 minutes to organize before transitions. So one thing that can happen is you do like 3 or 4 activities and you don't clean up the previous activities. So then these things start adding up. And then you have a whole bunch of stuff to clean and it's overwhelming and things get disorganized. So if you give yourself that time to transition where you're putting everything away, you're preparing for what's coming next, like give yourself that grace. A lot of times people with ADHD are going to rush through things and they're going to kind of speed to the next thing. And so if we can practice that mindfulness of slow down, let's think about what do we need to put away? What do we need to get out? How can we be prepared? That's going to help us succeed. So incorporate movement during instruction. So a lot of times we have stuck in our head that an activity needs to be done at the table, or we need to do this in a really calm way. But there's a lot of learning activities we can do while moving. You know, if we can create a learning activity to be physical and active, like that's awesome. And that's a funner way for everyone to learn. So look for ways to be creative in how we're working on things. So it's not just like a boring sit down activity. Next, clearly explain academic and social expectations. So maybe you are having friends over and right before you have friends over, you tell your kids, hey, we're having friends over and I know sometimes you guys fight. And so here's what I expect. When you guys have a conflict, I want you to compromise. I want you to try and resolve it yourself before coming to adults. I want you to keep your voice low and name calling is not allowed. You know, so you just spell out, here's how I want you to act in this situation. So last one is have students set up homework binders. So sometimes that helps if you have a big binder where you can have multiple subjects in it and then like everything is all in one place. So, you know, that might help your kiddo to have some sort of organizational system like that. So to conclude, I want to point out some of the good things about ADHD as well. So one kind of cool thing that the research says is that people with ADHD tend to actually fall in love pretty easy. So ADHD has a side to it that is hyper focus as well. So most of the time with ADHD, we talk about lack of focus. But when someone with ADHD has an interest in something, they can kind of zone in and just be like hyper focused on it, and like the world around them kind of disappears because they're in that moment. When you apply that to love, that can make a person feel pretty special. So that's a neat thing about people with ADHD. Another fun thing is that a lot of times adults who have ADHD become like jack of all trades type people. Because their ADHD gets them excited about things, and so they learn things quickly, and they tend to have a lot of different hobbies and interests because of this. In fact, people with ADHD tend to learn languages faster than the average person because they hyper focus on it. They're excited about it. It's a new thing. So that can help them actually learn things really quick. So I don't want you to think that ADHD is all negative because it definitely isn't. In some ways, it can help people succeed. So treatment for ADHD and autism is super compatible. It often looks the same. ADHD is a lifelong diagnosis. So keep in mind that if you're managing a child's ADHD, When you go away, they are going to struggle. So you need to teach them how to manage it themselves. They need alarms in their phone or different organizational systems, different routines. Like, we need to teach them to manage it so that they're not dependent on you when you're eventually not there. So ADHD is very treatable. People can definitely be successful with it. So yeah, there's a lot of help out there for people. And even just searching those executive functioning workbooks is a really great place to start. All right, well, thank you so much for listening. I hope this was helpful.